to begin in May, and the final audit will begin from September, with the annual report adoption scheduled for 30th October 2026. Asset valuations for 2026, buildings will be revalued. Other asset classes will not be revalued as no material movement is expected. Audit fees, the proposed audit fees for 2026 is 349,000, broadly in line with the budget and reflecting 5.8% increase from actual fees charged in 2025 due to the applied discount being progressively reduced each year. Ongoing qualifications and changes. The reverse asset qualification is expected to remain until 2027, and clean opinion is expected for roading assets. Also, Nelson City Council is moving to a new auditor, which may add some audit complexity, mainly due to the audit of joint business units. These are the key points from the report, so I'll hand it over to Yvonne now. Thanks.
Thank you, Sashini. It was really good summary of all the reports, and thank you so much. Kira, for any new members in the committee, I'm Yvonne Yang, the Audit Director in Audit New Zealand Christchurch office. I'm now in my third year serving as the appointed auditor for Tasman District Council, and local government is the primary focus of my portfolio. I think Sashini has really provided very good comprehensive summary of all the reports that's attached. What I want to add is I concur with management overall. You will see the first attachment is our report to the council for 2025 annual audit. Overall, the audit process has gone really well with both management and our team working together constructively. We really appreciated good quality and timeliness of all the information provided by management in the council, despite the pressures faced by them in responding to the 2025 flooding event at the time. We have provided the second attachment is the draft audit plan, and the content is intended to support our discussion with committee. So I welcome your feedback, and I'm really happy to elaborate further if you have any questions. I will hand over back to the chair and then see if anyone have any questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Any questions from the committee members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Yvonne. It's Brett Murray speaking. I've just got a couple of questions. So in terms of one of the areas you've highlighted is the control over journals. So in terms of authorisation of journals, and therein our answer to date is just the system won't handle it. So what sort of risk or findings are you likely to look at in terms of that journal control? And the other one is, what are the perceived risk of scope creep with having different auditors for Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council with our joint business units? So what is the risk of scope creep from that?
Thank you. Sure to you, Chair. The first question around the review of the journal, it is our expectation, and it is also good practice for the journals that have a appropriate review process. But we understand the council finance system currently does not have a built-in control to prevent the same individual from both preparing and approving journals. And now I just want to add, there's only very few instances that we find through our sampling testing, and overall the control environment is pretty good, and the review process is in place, and just with a few instances of missing. I think we have received very positive feedback from management. I think all these the new recommendations they are being well looked after. The second question around the Nelson City Council appointed auditor has been changed to Ernst & Young. That is the result. We have rebalanced our portfolio, and with NCC to be audited by EY from 2026 onwards. This has minimum impact on the Tasman District Council audit. We will liaison with EY and Nelson City Council management on any issue arising from the consolidation review, following the same process previously used when Audit New Zealand performed the audit. So there are no additional costs to Tasman District Council audit associated with this change.
Councillor. Thank you. It's Neubauer. It's easy. Now, I've got a question around the risk that you flagged around internal controls and governance as well. Just simply as a solution to this risk, have you got an opinion on whether there would be benefit for council to appoint an internal ombudsman who is assigned the powers to look into issues at arm's length?
Which recommendation are you referring to? Sorry.
Page 15, internal controls and governance, where you noticed instances of self-approved or unapproved journals, the same issue that Councillor Maru referred to. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that.
Oh, yeah. Our recommendation is for management to improve their review process. So for the journal reviews, our expectation is the responsibility sits within the finance team, and that is a pretty standard process within the finance team, and someone prepare the journal and then a one-up review of the journal that's posted into the system.
Thank you for that. Independent member, Mona Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things from me. I could probably half answer the question around the general journal review. That I'm sure Yvonne will tell us that it's a very common finding that goes into a lot of local government management letter items at the end of every year, and it's not one that actually makes me nervous when I'm a kind of governor in local government, as long as I have an understanding that there are compensating controls. Because although Yvonne has a through Audit New Zealand's external audit obligations, you know, this is one of the criteria. It's very targeted and specific to general journals, and I know Yvonne that that is best practice, and that we definitely should try and adhere to that. But as a governor of the Audit and Risk Committee, I want to have an understanding of is the risk actually exposed? Are there compensating controls in place? And I think as you'll hear through the Audit and Risk Committee, through the other work we do, that I'm sure management can allude to at another time, there are compensating controls to make sure that those risks are mitigated. The second thing I wanted to, again, just good reference for this committee, is that my experience of probably 18 months on this committee is that I think both times, so this will be my third external audit going through, is that we have adopted on time, which is not actually a common feat across local government in New Zealand, which I'm sure the chair can kind of tell you. But my experience is the last couple of years is that the efforts of the finance team and management, and also Yvonne as audit director, being able to adopt on time at the 31st of October, touch wood, I'm not taking fate here, but is an amazing feat. So my one question actually relates to that, and it is around the non-revaluation assets, and I guess the review of assumptions. And is there any risk compared to prior year? Is there any risk that will hold us up from a timeline perspective?
Thanks for your question, Annalisa. For the fair value assessment on non-variation assets, we have already advanced this review, and last month we have looked at the management prepared fair value assessment around all the infrastructure assets, and as well as land fair value assessment. We have provided feedback around the land. Obviously, the index for land is not that easily accessible. So I think management noted in the paper as well that QB will provide indices in particular that appropriate to the land portfolio that the council has owned. So for that, although I have not seen the letter yet, but I see the risk is remote at this stage. but we have agreed on the full revaluation on building that is underway, and we have planned for our review in June.
Thank you.
Councillor Woods.
Thank you, and to the chair. Is there any reputational risk to receiving a qualified opinion as opposed to a clean opinion?
Thanks for your question, through to Chair. It is not uncommon for some of the local government receive qualifications, and qualification has a wide range to it. The qualification including limited of scope, which also we call it except for. There is the qualification opinion that Tasman District Council was received last year, in particular around a set of assets that impact by the flooding event. So the impairment assessment was qualified for us that we cannot obtain appropriate audit evidence. But also there's a further qualification around the material misstatement qualification, which is another level up that will means some level of control deficiencies and or further serious matters that's noted in the audit opinion, but also we will have adverse opinion and disclaimer. So I wouldn't say there's no reputational risk, but the audit opinion is well explained of why that there is limited scope in place, and the council has opportunity to explain the rationale in their annual report to the rates payer or the report reader why this exercise was not be able to be done, and also disclose a roadmap or a plan for going forward that to resolve this issue in the future years.
Thank you. Any other questions before I sort of sum up? And there may well be questions coming from my summing up, and I'm happy to take those. Look, thank you, Yvonne, for that. And I'd like to acknowledge the work that's been done by the finance team as well, particularly Charlotte, who was on really the sharp end of getting statutory financials. And Charlotte, just record my thanks over the last 4 years, probably, might be 5, that we've been working together there, and you're going on leave very shortly with a new family member, and I certainly give you my very best thoughts, and I'm sure that of the committee as well, and thank you in a public environment for all the good work that's been done. And these financial statements are very technical with accounting standards that we're obliged to be with. But a couple of things that have come up, auditors, and I'm judging back to my time as an auditor and now an audit regulator, that the auditor has no choice but to regard journal entries as a high risk area. We in the sector, and this is not just this council, but other councils, have legacy software which does not have the modern built-in controls that would be there for authorisation. The council has, from my discussions with them, put a patch band-aid around it in a Microsoft developed product, but I was just talking this morning to them, and it's not 100% reliable when you hit approve that it actually records it too. So there's a few patchworks around this, but the cost of actually changing to a modern system is not cheap. It's probably going to be tens of millions to change. And so they are soldiering on with some very old software running there. In 8.3 on page 21, Audit New Zealand referred to another council who got a clean opinion following the year following their flood damage. I think we should just touch on that for a moment, knowing the council concerned. The flood event happened 4 to 5 months ahead of balance date. We had 2 major floods within 10 days either side of balance date. And my own opinion is that we're best to get the data right than rush and potentially make mistakes, but also incur extra costs, which have got to be funded by our ratepayers. And we may well be in a position by this balance date to have a reasonably good guess, but will it be good enough to satisfy audit requirements? Probably not. And are we better to really rush that and try and get that result, or do we just take a breath, disclose where we're at, and get it right? And I think that personally, I believe that the answer is to get it right and not put our staff under undue pressure. And then someone will come along afterwards and point out that there were errors in it because we rushed. So personally, I'm quite comfortable. There is a PR risk associated with a qualified audit opinion, and it may get reported further up the chain. But if we've got good reasons and we're in control of the narrative, why? I'd be very concerned if we're not there June 27 with a clean audit report on 27. We may still have a tag in the audit opinion referring back to 26. It's just the way it works. Auditors just hang on in there afterwards until the comparatives are all clean. So I'm very comfortable with where things are at on this. And the other one that might come up in the thinking when you read the papers is the significant risk of management override. That again is mandated by auditing standards, and that's the approach the auditor must take. It does, but there are compensating controls there. But in any organisation, if someone at the top directs something down and no one squeaks, which is why we've got whistleblower lines and people like myself that people can call, then there is something that could be manipulated. But we then have balance sheet recs, we have external audit, we have internal processes, whistleblower lines, and a whole bunch of mitigating controls to try and reduce that risk to an acceptable risk appetite. And I think this council's done that. So some of these things are driven by international auditing standards that Yvonne and her team have no option but follow. We've also got in here engagement letters, and that's been touched on. I'm in discussions with Yvonne on some minor typographical and disclosure points within there that does not impact the substance of that report or that engagement letter, and we will resolve that offline before recommending Mayor Tim signs it. But in principle, we've got a document there that's usable. If that's raised any other questions, please feel free to state. Otherwise, we have a recommendation on page 13, I believe, of our papers. Could I have a councillor move that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Marrow. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any further discussion before I put the motion? All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. And Yvonne, thank you for your attendance, and we've got you out about 60 seconds before your deadline.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you.
Now moving back to 6.1, which is the Audit Committee work plan and terms of reference report. So we usually look at the terms of reference and at the beginning of a triennium, and then we look at the annual work plan certainly once a year, be early in the year, but we also will continuously have it as a live document. So with that little intro, Amy.
Thank you. I'm not actually sure I have much more to say aside from I prepared the work plan with the terms of reference in mind, and it covers all the things that we will hopefully see over the next triennium, with an allowance to be flexible in some instances where some things have to move or be added. And I'm just coming to count to audit risk to get confirmation that I'm happy with the work plan as it is.
I might just add that we have got a cross-referencing in the work plan to the terms of reference so that members can be confident at the end of the triennium and in fact each year that we are covering off all the things that are required in our terms of reference, because it can be quite difficult sitting there looking at a work plan if it's not cross-referenced, and you can see then when things are coming up and when things are due. But there is some space in there if there's particular concerns that we can build in. I think we've got space for 3 or 4 little projects in there, Amy, but you might correct me if I'm wrong. If there's something that's really burning and the consensus is that we want to perhaps build in a particular item, I don't mind the concept of pre-scheduling at least some of them, but I would like to keep space for a project in case something comes at us that we didn't see coming along there. And all of these things, of course, have budgetary concerns. Amy, sorry.
Well, I have allowed, in particular in the risk section, for risk deep dives, which is a topic of choice that's particularly relevant. So it could come under that. But of course, if the Audit and Risk Committee want to see something in particular, we could bring that. It might mean a reshuffle of other items on the agenda, but with some resourcing and requests from Audit and Risk, we can make change.
I just highlight that the council is under budgetary constraint and does have quite limited resources. So we need to use our resource wisely, but I'll open up for questions. I can see Councillor Wood's hand up.
Thank you, Graham. Mine is very well done. I love this. This is great. So congratulations on getting a good report out. Mine was around the first opportunity to look at the council risk appetite. We do have a new set of councillors. I noticed that by setting it in the September meeting, it's actually an evaluation of change in appetite after the annual plan. Is there any way to bring that forward?
Yes, I am looking at trying to schedule a workshop with council soon, and I guess I maybe pushed it out a little bit to try and allow myself time to get in front of council as a whole to discuss it in a workshop and things, and then perhaps bring it to Audit and Risk after that. And I was really just allowing time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Through the chair, we are bringing it forward. I think it's really critical for the long-term plan, particularly after conversations last week that we had in the strategy day. I think that really informed us of where you think the risks lie, and it may well change our work program in the LTP. So, yeah, priority. We might have to move another workshop aside, but this has to happen. We may look at some external help with that as well, because I think it would be good to get some independence.
If I may, through the chair, but your reference was to the annual plan, and that the workshop on risk appetite would come after council had adopted, or otherwise, the annual plan. And what I'd point out is the annual plan is the third iteration of the long-term plan. And so a lot of the risk that we have discussed, as we will do for our long-term plan, has been discussed and addressed in the previous council. So to a certain extent, I don't want to say that that work is locked and loaded, but there's a certain number of decisions that have been made in terms of preparing the annual plan, which are based on the adoption of risk and the risk appetite of the previous council. So by the time we get to that point in the calendar, the opportunity for substantive change may be limited with respect to risk, just for the annual plan. The long-term plan, completely different scenario.
Yeah. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, I noted that, and reading the risk assessment in the Audit and Risk report, it's not clear to me that the AP risks are aligned with Audit and Risk, and whether there's no clarity on management priority of the risks in AR, and there's no clarity on mitigation capital that would need to be required to address it. So I hear what you say, but it would be good to understand clearly in terms of your definition of risk, because we talked about that this morning, about risk definition, and whether the risks noted in the report are being addressed in the AP LTP.
Deputy Mayor Murray.
I think it was the chair, and through the chair, I think we're going around in circles quite often, isn't it? Just two questions. So firstly, the procurement policy, I think that's programmed, so it's an annual review, isn't it? So that's going to be sitting in Q2, I think, of 26, 27, because I'm sure it was coming back here a year later. And the other part, just that conflict of interest component in terms of that sniff test of declarations of interest that may have been discussed earlier in terms of a work plan about having a look at our procurement policy, where conflicts might exist, just some transparency and testing of that system. I think the chair might have some great suggestions of some external software that might be available.
Thank you. I will take that lead. Look, conflicts of interest is a lot of the stuff that's disclosed by its very nature is governed by the Privacy Act and becomes an issue. What we as the committee need to have is assurance that the processes are there to identify them, that there can be some processes for testing, and this can be quite wide-ranging. And about this time in the last triennium, we did a wee piece of work to just test the accuracy of conflicts of interest declarations, and they're only a direct declaration. It hasn't got to the stage that it is a real conflict, but people disclosing. And we did find, a few inadvertent oversights, which we reminded appropriate was elected members at community board level. I think there was one item, if I recall, that they had inadvertently and not declared. It wasn't an issue as it turns out, but it's an interest that they had, which didn't really conflict with council business, but really should be out there. And there is, you're right, software out there to allow checking through for potential conflicts by spidering through public records and identifying who's directors of this, who lives in the same address, all those types of things that might come out. And these things come up, regularly, and I'm aware that our COO had a wee update to his ones recently with having had a change in property arrangements, and all those we can get busy in life and miss them. So the other advantage of this is one of our biggest risks is that we spend a lot of money, and therefore procurement is automatically a potential issue and risk. And the same process would also help identify whether there's any interest or anything in the process of the people involved in processes for procurement. So I think it's a relatively cheap process to get the spidering done, but it's ultimately I'd look to the CE to have a think about this as to whether we should be going into there and provide assurance, but we can't get into detail at this level.
That's true. We do have spidering software. So exactly, I think you might have recommended it yourself, or Graham one do something. We had 2 Grahams. We do have spidering software. So what it does is any supplier goes into our database. We will do checks across company records, people matching. We have found some, nothing really significant, but we certainly do have spidering software. It's not actually that overly expensive, and we do run it regularly. I know it's through Charlotte's team, and she looks after our, she's on in here now, our sensitive expenditure as well. So we're pretty robust in that space.
Maybe worthwhile just even getting a summary, if we've done those processes already, getting a summary of how do we protect against potential conflict of interest back out there, a paperback at a probably, if it was possible, if the work's been done, maybe next meeting, but I'll leave that for management to look at the feasibility of that if everyone's happy with that concept, so we as a group can be up to date and confident that we've got good processes. Any other comments? If not, we have a recommendation on page 4 in our papers. It's up on screen. Do I have a mover in that direction, or is it a comment?
Yeah, just sorry, happy to move, Mr. Chair, but just reflecting that we've also updated the procurement policy review at whatever quartile that was, and happy to move.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Barra. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Woods. Any last discussion before I put the motion? If not, all those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. Moving on to item 6.3, Audit and Risk Committee role in the long-term plan. Welcome to the table, Alan, who's done an awesome job in past LTPs and brings with him many years of experience and probably a few bruises as well from the process. Thank you. I'll hand to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will take the paper that was circulated on the agenda as read. I've got a short presentation really to sort of focus the conversation today. So, I can't move that. Okay, so just in terms of where this topic came from, so it comes from a couple of different directions. So one. We employed consultants to do a big debrief of our last LTP process, and one of their recommendations was that there was opportunities to make better use of the Audit and Risk Committee in the LTP process. It was also a recommendation of the external auditor through the last LTP, and it's an action item on the committee's list of actions. So that's where this is sort of arrived from. And what I've tried to do here in terms of I guess suggesting some areas where the committee can add value is to try and link that to the terms of reference. I won't dwell on this slide, but yeah, that's sort of the starting point. And then sort of middle of last year, myself and the chair exchanged some emails around those opportunities, and we've used that to sort of structure this presentation and the paper that came out before the meeting. So just in thinking about the roles for the committee, just need to think about a few sort of practical considerations around the project. So one obviously is trying to make sure that that any input from the Audit and Risk Committee is timely, so that it comes at a point before sort of things have been set in concrete and those sort of things. So yeah, trying to bring new things early rather than too late. But there's also an issue of responsiveness to the timelines and pressures of the LTP project as a whole. So the project is big. It's got lots of moving parts. It's got a very tight timeline for us to get through. And at times the timings of the meetings of the Audit and Risk Committee and the timings of the project don't necessarily align that well. So we have to sort of work around those as much as we can. But they do create some constraints. And yeah, I guess that's comes down to sort of being practical about what we can bring through to the committee for its input at an appropriate time. So first area where I felt there was potentially a role for the committee was around our relationship with external audit. So the LTP has to be audited at two stages: once around the consultation document and all the supporting information that goes along with that, and then for the final LTP. I guess I would characterise the committee's involvement in previous LTPs as being not really being very much involved until right at the very end, and at times we've ended up in a bit of an arm wrestle with Audit New Zealand about additional fees after the audit is finished and after the LTP is signed off. And at times, particularly the external audit members have been helpful in working with staff around kind of arm wrestling with Audit New Zealand around that fee. And for me, that's probably not certainly suboptimal. And so we'd like to get suggesting that the committee be more involved earlier in the process in terms of establishing the plan, the timeline, the letter of engagement, and then I guess getting updates of how the relationship is working with Audit New Zealand through the process. We have in the next report, you'll see in the first report today, we have started a regular conversation with Audit New Zealand around the LTP audit, and aiming to try and make the whole process as smooth and pain-free for all of us as possible, and continue to do that. So suggesting that there's a role here around that ongoing relationship with Audit New Zealand. I don't know what that was there. The second area is around risk management, and so there's three points here. So one's around making sure that the risks to the councils. I got this name. Oh, sorry, I may have skipped ahead of my notes here. Sorry. sorry, so I'll go back. So risk areas here, one was around reliability of the models involved in the LTP. So we use a number of different models. And again, in the next report you've got on your agenda is us starting to have these conversations with you before we've had the conversation about what role you want to play. But yeah, so really to talk to you about those models and how reliable they are as things that underpin the LTP process. Delivery of the LTPs, again, another important issue. So it's all very well having put things into our plan for the future, but really looking at what ability we have to deliver that. So again, not, I guess, making unrealistic plans that we will struggle to deliver. One around the reasonableness of our key assumptions. So we are required to identify assumptions in our planning as part of the LTP process. Reasonableness of key policies, and I guess I sort of boiling that down probably to the three key ones, being the financial strategy, the infrastructure strategy, and the revenue and financing policy. There are a number of other kind of lesser policies, but I think those are the key ones for this committee. Fiscal prudence in funding the balance sheet risks. So again, quite closely related to the financial strategy and the risks around that. And then one around whether we're actually asking the right questions in the consultation. So yeah, certainly in the consultation, and in this case, in our LTP, we're trying to use a process of ongoing engagement through the process rather than just leaving it all to the consultation at the end. And again, some opportunities to think about whether we're asking the right questions and engaging on the right topics through the process as well as at the end. So three more here. So yeah, really making sure that in our LTP we clearly disclose the risks around the council's strategy. So particularly financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, and the impact of political risks from the central government. So central government's got quite a involved process of legislative and other reform changes going on, many of which will affect our LTP. So again, really understanding that impact as we go through. And I think sort of coming out at the end of the LTP, whether the LTP then actually prompts some risks that need to be further monitored and within the committee's purview from the point the LTP finishes going forward. So really, those are up for your discussion and your feedback, and based on the results of that discussion, we'll try to bring reports to it for each of the audit and risk committee meetings, which focus on those items. So with that, I'll happy to open up for discussion and any thoughts really about how how you can best contribute to this process.
Thank you, Alan. As you'll probably see in the papers, he's labelled it clearly Chair's suggestion up here. And maybe if we drop back to the second slide, might be useful if we could. Yeah, that's, sorry, not second. Keep you down the one where you started bullet pointing the points. But reliability of the matters involved. Well, I'll preface this to say this committee's role is to look at the risks of the council strategy. It is not to second guess the council's strategy. That is the role in this chamber for the councillors to do. Ours is purely a support function to make sure the council is aware of the risks that we can see in the strategy they're proposing to adopt. And we need to be very clear about that in our discussions, that I won't be allowing council's agreed strategy at the point to be relitigated, but rather focusing on raising the risks to achieving that strategy. So this is all done with modelling, and I think we can probably all remember, if we've been in the local government sector for a while, errors coming out in models, whether it be in the rating numbers or somewhere else, and someone's had to fess up, let's not be there. That's really the first one. The ability to deliver, and that's the capability, the doability of what we're doing. We all get very keen on saying that we're going to get things done, but sometimes we could be at risk of over optimism. What's the risk for the council? Well, if it's if the steps are funded by ratepayers, we may take their money a bit too soon, whereas we could actually hold back. This council's got an excellent balance sheet and the ability to tap in to short-term funding if we get ahead of the game and want to carry on. We could actually deliver some year 2 things in year 1. But it's probably better that than delivering year 1 things in year 2, having taken the money in the previous year. So I see that as a risk with our public credibility, and to get that right. Reasonableness of the key assumptions that we're making, some of those might be growth orientated, they may be all sorts of areas, but have we actually got it right? Have we stood back and said, is that assumption reasonable that we're basing all this on? And again, reasonableness of key policies. The policies are required to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting practice if we look at section 110 of the Local Government Act. So making sure we're not going down a policy which is not going to be acceptable when it comes time for the audit. Next one we had there was fiscal prudence and funding. We've got section 100, 101, 102, those series there to make sure that we've got a balanced budget, unless there's really good reasons, in which case the council would need to resolve on those reasons, that we need to be fiscally prudent. So those are all risks if we overcommit ourselves. And in that area, we need to think about our ability to borrow, our treasury policy, about how much we can realistically go out and borrow, and should we. What is our insurance mitigation? Because part of our insurance mitigation is the ability to fix stuff up through borrowing if it happens. So there's lots of interconnecting pieces there that we need to think about. Making sure the right questions are consulted on. So are we engaging with our community and asking them the right questions if we're making big decisions about things? Continuation of services may come into play with the rates cap potentially coming. We may have to stand back and look at this stuff, but are we talking to them on the right matters? The next slide one through was impact of political risks. There's been a lot of talking of changes in the sector. We haven't quite seen the detail, but we need to be very aware that we're responsive to that and understanding what central government is commanding us to do. And really, out of all of this, are we entering into strategies, projects, whatever, which have an inherent risk level that we ought to be putting management around those risks right up front? So that was my sort of thinking behind that little shortlist that we shared last year with Alan. And I just leave it open for you to think about it, but bear in mind what our role is to get assurance and risk and identify risks and see that those risks are managed for the agreed strategy of the council. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, through the chair. I think what comes to my mind is along the lines of what you've just said, Chair, about not cutting across the council. And I wouldn't want to see the Audit and Risk Committee cutting across management or the responsibility of the CEO, particularly with the previous slide. But for the second slide, I wouldn't want to see us fall into some requiring a lot of information to come to this committee for the sake of it. And that's what would worry me. So I would want to see that it is actually issues of concern or question only. And then with the second slide, I think that maybe the political risks would be something that could be considered by the Audit and Risk Committee. That's my comment.
I agree with you, Councillor Butler. This committee's role is to be the canary in the coal mine, not actually doing all the legwork of mining the coal. That's to be done elsewhere, and we've got to be very careful we don't actually redo work, but we get very focused on just have we got assurance that the risks in the strategy are appropriately managed, and be very focused. Councillor Morgan.
The one thing come to mind in discussing this is because we only have 4 meetings, that we're discussing it at the appropriate meeting. So probably this discussion here should have been had at this meeting, because we're going through the process now, and through the chair, perhaps you ought to check all of this, that we have got the appropriate timing of the discussions. Otherwise, it's we'll be out of sync.
And ineffective. But I think that's why we've got a work plan that thinks through, and Amy is working very hard and liaising with everyone to make sure stuff's coming up at the right time.
Yeah, well, that, all I suggest is it's, that's checked through the chief executive, because we've had some discussion already over the last 4 months about scheduling workshops and timeliness of various matters. As I say, we've only got 4 meetings, and those meetings need to be appropriately agended so that we cover the matters and provide if we desire, the advice to council from Audit and Risk.
All the more reason for us to be focused. But Steve is our assigned officer for this, and his team will be making sure that this all surfaces at the right time and on a timely basis. So we're not like a typical auditor and coming along after the battle and stabbing the dead. Sorry, I was one, so I can probably say that. So, independent member, have you got any items to make?
No, I think I concur with all commentary. I mean, the independent comments that, what is the role of the Audit and Risk Committee? I didn't really kind of give too much detail on what that should be. It just said there should be a role. Assuming you've kind of given some ideas as to what that role would be. I'm probably one step higher in that, quite rightly, we're four meetings a year, and Graham and I are only 4 meetings a year. So we don't, and that's the kind of luxury, or not luxury, but that's the nuance, I guess, of having independent members, right? So we don't come to full council hui. So I'd be mindful about that role of getting too much into the weeds. I think for me it would be around understanding that there's been a really good process, probably being up to date during that process, and then testing, like we said, no different to, we set a strategy, or council sets a strategy, management executes strategy. I'd want to have an understanding that the risks have been identified and well understood, and so I think that's where we could, as a committee, could add value, would be testing those risks and testing the thinking process around, why do we think it would be a risk and what would be the consequence of that risk. But I'd like management to do that first, because not so much on the work front, but actually you understand this organisation way better than I do. So I think where I can, or we can add value, is just testing those assumptions that have been made.
Deputy Mayor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm just thinking out loud. So thank you, Leonie, in terms of bringing the risk framework and the appetite forward, because I guess that's the biggest impact that we could leverage on your experience in terms of externally, is we get the framework right, because actually the appetite is a political decision. And so before I sat here, the last couple of minutes have been really helpful in terms of the role of audit and risk, and being really careful that it doesn't go across governance and policy setting. So I guess it's that. It's the asking the question of the decision, making sure there's awareness of the level of risk and the balance of the decisions we make, rather than the detail. Really, it's the framework and the system that's the valuable part.
Thank you. Very valid comments, that we do need to be looking at this from the helicopter and not down in the weeds, and keeping it high level and getting assurance that those risks have been identified and are being appropriately addressed. Councillor.
Yep. Look, I totally agree that we should be testing the process. I think that's our role, but I think that leads directly to Councillor Morgan's concern, and I would concur with that the process has already started and we haven't tested it yet. So are we retrospectively testing the process in 3 months, or is that still good timing?
So that silence would indicate that certainly in my case, I didn't actually understand the question, Councillor McGrath.
So sorry. Well, I'm talking about the process of embarking onto a long-term plan, right? So the process is already in motion. We already have a scheduled workshops. We've got scheduled meetings to agree on on certain parameters. So my question is that the sort of process that we should be looking at is audit and risk, or has the chair something else in mind?
I see the point you're raising. I think as an audit and risk committee, we are coming along slightly after the event, because you'll be developing not only risk, but until you get the strategy sorted of what you're trying to deliver, it is very, very hard to get the risks. But if you're aware as you're going through of some of these things, like we must comply with the Local Government Act, we must recognise the costs and balance sheet items, all in terms of gap, and as we're going through. And I have been on a council where they tried to do something, that a big project that was outside generally accepted accounting process, and the way they were recognising it within the LTP, and they needed an audit and risk committee to straighten up the aim there and go back and say, now have another think about this when you actually understand all the rules of this. So I think it's an unparalleled situation, which is why I think Alan had come up with concept of bringing a paper as to where we're growing over the next 4 or 5 meetings before the adoption. So it's going to be an evolving process. I think rather than it's a one shot now, we can do it all now up front. I don't think that's possible. Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, I have a specific case in mind of how the interplay between risk and development of strategy plays out, but it's specific to 6.4, the next item. So I will park it, but if I can raise it then.
I wonder if you and I are thinking the same thing. I've got a matter there noted. Thank you. Leonie.
To the chair. So for our long-term plan, we do have a risk register. So we're looking at things like whether we're going at the risk of looking at growth model and not correct, the effective rates capping that may well have on us, around development levies and having a review of what we can expect. So there's got a whole lot of risks in there which we can share. So we do have a program where we're working through those. So I guess it's around the visibility of the processes we're going through the long-term plan. And I'm just sort of turning my mind to whether we should be doing check-ins with you rather than just taking you through the tunnel, like, you know, now we're going to the financial roadmap and et cetera, and whether there's actually some check-in points, this is where the project's at. So I'll come up with some thoughts and come back to you, because I think particularly for this committee, it'll be important to make sure that you know that we're on track, but we are considering what those risks are, and it may be that you'll help us resolve some of those through some of our workshops. Yeah. We have certainly got a list of risks, and some of them are quite high, so see we're managing those.
Thank you. Any other comments at this stage?
We're just discussing risk.
It's got to be in a risk context.
I'm just talking about process of audit and risk and the sign off of the auditor's proposed draft plan for the year. We've obviously missed that because it's our first meeting, but for me, it's a normal process. So I'm interested in your comment on it.
Yeah, I think we were dealing with that under item 6.2 earlier.
Yeah, if I just might say, for in terms of the audit plan for the LTP, that's not yet in place. So that is yet to come.
Okay.
The key issue is going to be timing. So whether we get that plan from the audit, draft planning from auditors to comment on and try and finalise at a time when this committee is meeting and we can bring it to this committee. So that there may be a timing mismatch, but we'll if we possibly can, we'll try and get it through to it'll probably be the next committee, I think, if we can make it work.
Yeah. So my comment really is, once again, it's the challenge of getting the key decisions of this Audit and Risk Committee scheduled for decision making, if possible. That's a comment.
Thank you. I think we've had a good discussion on the concept of this, and I look forward to seeing reports at future meetings coming through as these risks are identified and the key ones are brought back here to understand how we are managing those and getting assurance that it's done. We have a recommendation on page, I think it's 100.
It's just a presentation. Great. So there's no.
Oh, sorry, 6.3. Yeah, I've stepped ahead. 6.4. If there's no other comment, we'll just move forward into item 6.4. And I think it's Alan, you again.
Yes, me again. So effectively, this is the first of those reports around the LTP. And obviously, we've put this together without having had the conversation we just had. So we've sort of made our best stab at it on this occasion. So hopefully that goes some way to meeting your needs. So just a number of topics we've covered here. So one is our sort of work in progress forecasting assumptions. So the assumptions are something that we are required to include in the final long-term plan under the LGA. We are trying to develop a set of working assumptions relatively early in the process to try and assure consistency within the planning. So we have lots of different people involved in the planning, and we'd like them all to make the same assumptions about things than different assumptions, so we have some consistency. We will, with some of the assumptions, we will get more information through the year, and so they will need to be updated, and we will sort of bring those back to the committee as they evolve through the year. So that's one area. Again, we're sharing them at this early stage to get any feedback from the committee that will help us sharpen these up, potentially fill any gaps. So if you have thoughts on the sort of work in progress pack that were attached to today's meeting, then it would be really good to receive those. There's a little bit there on the reliability of some of the models we've used. So we've talked about the growth model and some of the financial models. So starting to try and feed that information through to you. Financial roadmap, so there's a little bit of information around that process. It's still sort of an evolving process, how we work through from that roadmap into the financial strategy. And then we've also then tried to identify a number of pieces of the central government legislation and reform program that we believe creates risks for the LTP planning, and tried to sort of start identifying those risks. With that section in particular, be interested to know whether the sort of format and way we've done that hits the mark for the committee, or there's a better way that we can sort of do that going through. Yeah, so the report does cover a wide range of issues, and I guess I've got a level of knowledge across all of them, but not necessarily that deep on all of them. So we may get into questions which I'm not able to answer today, and if that's the case, we will take those and bring that information back to you. But with that, I'll take the report.
Questions from committee members? Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Yeah, just on, I just can't find it now. Sorry, 6.5, where you refer to by ward for the 3 wards. Is that a typo? It says 3 wards. Is it meant to be 5 wards? Just 6.5, third sentence. Says, look.
I'll just read it. Sorry, it probably is a bit of a typo. There are 4 catchments for development contributions. 3, one of them is the whole district, and the other 3 are Golden Bay, Motueka, and Waimea.
Right.
So,
I just can't understand.
Yeah, they probably shouldn't be referred to as wards. They should be referred to there as development contribution catchments.
Should be catchments.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Graham, through the chair.
Mine is around the risks associated with the adopted projection of growth for the district. And obviously, we've been previously informed that they do feed into the global demand and supply model, and also MAGIC, which is the financial model. But less clear, well, we've been explained that on balance of risk, we would be opting for the high growth model, despite the fact that in recent times our consentings have dropped off and we've been not meeting our target growth as per expected from the previous plan. Is this a blip or is this a new reality is yet to be determined. But what I'm questioning here is, can we have an explanation of the risks associated with the outputs? We know it's going as an input into those two algorithms. Can we have a summary of the outputs that the risk is tagged to for that metric?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not entirely sure that I understand the question, but just to go back in terms of the scenario. So again, for the external members, we had a workshop a week or two ago around the options for the population projection scenario to use in the growth model. Had good kind of robust discussion. I have to say, it didn't seem to be a clear consensus around the table. So we will be bringing a report through to the next Strategy and Policy Committee to further address that. We've tried to pick up on some of the pieces of information and queries we had from elected members at the workshop in that report, and ultimately, you know, the aim is that the committee makes a decision at that point. So at the moment, no decision made on which scenario to use. I think, Council, you were talking about the risks around the outputs. Can you able to just help me a little more?
Yes. So if I read between the lines, this adopted projection is going to be driving our expectations around revenues, debt provisions, capital expenditure on infrastructure. So it would be helpful to understand how those outcomes are being driven by this one particular number and the risks we're exposed to as a council by getting that number wrong.
Through the chair, we can. I mean, in this report itself, it does cover some of those off in the discussion on risk on projections in general. So, for example, what happens if you too quickly roll out your infrastructure or too slowly roll out your infrastructure, and the consequences of squeezing out debt, for example, because you've effectively got a higher debt loading and the revenue coming in to fund it. So I think those are the sorts of things that you're talking about, and maybe we can flesh ours out a bit more for the 19th of, I think it's the 19th of March, decision report. There is a bunch of, there is a risk assessment in this report that that covers that. If there's any gaps, please let us know probably in the next couple of days, so we can make sure we cover those off in those final reports.
I think,
Morgan,
through you, Mr. Chair, that's an important point because we haven't really been briefed fully on water, waste and roads and bridges, etc. So, and there's a number of issues highlighted in this report that are risks that we need to better understand to be able to comment on whether the council will actually hear.
Deputy Mayor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the other part of the risk I'm really interested in, Alan, is the risk of not doing it. So the risk of not meeting a national policy statement or government directive. What is the punishment if we choose? So what we heard was likely we're going to be told we're going to be high growth because that's what the country needs. But what's the risk if we don't? So not necessarily whether we get there or not. What's the risk if we just don't plan in that and those metrics that we're directed to? And is there any risk? So it's probably more the softer stuff rather than just impact on rates and debt. Yeah. What's the financial reputational risk around not doing the planning the way that we are told to do?
I might just, I might just touch on that here very, very, very quickly. There is a political risk associated with not planning to meet growth that's quite difficult to assess because it somewhat depends on the government's appetite to intervene. And I mean, that's code for saying this government has indicated a willingness to step in if there are outcomes to it that it's important. to directly intervene, and there's the escalation process that the Crown can do to appoint observers, yada yada, and ultimately commissioners. Yeah, but whether they'll be prepared to do that depends, I guess, on how egregious the breach is in terms of the planning and their appetite to intervene, which is very hard to judge, I have to say. We can try and cover that in less specific terms in the report.
Councillor Newbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a question whether the growth model identifies the infrastructure costs involved in achieving the growth in rating units, and whether it differentiates between different options of achieving this growth. Dwayne, you'll guess my question already, whether there's a difference in infrastructure costs between greenfield and intensification, and whether that model is actually putting that into context with the rates revenue derived from similar areas.
The growth model doesn't identify the cost. It's information that helps us identify the cost through the LTP process. But I think that's the question you're really asking, like, will we be able to understand that link? And the answer is yes. The second question, I believe, was, can we run parallel sort of scenarios that identify different potential growth options and what the cost might be? And the answer is that is probably a lot more difficult. Our model assumes a particular rollout. It doesn't allow us to do scenarios. And so if we were to do all scenarios, it would be one model based on our best guess of how things are going to roll out, and another one which would be based on a more core set of assumptions, assessments, and so on and so forth, if that comparison was wanted. And sorry, there was a third question, Councillor. What was it?
Yes, I think the cost is one component, but the cost is, in itself doesn't mean very much unless we understand the revenue that comes in. So I would like to see some assumptions for different growth models that bring those two together, so we can actually make a conscious decision as to what sort of growth we want to achieve in our district.
Cool, thank you. For the base model, whatever we assume, we can certainly do an estimate of revenues. We for example, through the annual plan process, assume 1.3 in additional rates revenue coming in this forthcoming year, and we have a global growth assumption in the rates revenue projections going forward, so we can see that revenue impact. In terms of the capital cost, that's very clearly identified through the long-term plan process, and we have a forecast based on that growth model for the development contributions and reserve financial contributions, so that we can see the capital cost coming in as well. So we can do that. Again, for an alternative scenario, it's probably a little harder, and I take the point around identifying the risks of that as well. One of the big ones, I guess, I do want to say, and we will need to bring this to the council properly at some point, is particularly around, I guess, an area of interest to yours, councillor, is what happens if we try to increase the emphasis on particularly intensification and infill intensification as opposed to greenfield intensification. And through the future development strategy, one of the key pieces of information you'll be aware of, which was contended in the process, but it was actually instrumental in framing how much intensification we could get versus greenfield growth, was the economic feasibility of intensification. And the FDS adopted an assumption that 15% of our theoretical intensification could be realised in any 30-year period. And that effectively put a bit of a cap on that. And the risk associated with that, coming to risk, is that if we take an assumption on intensification that assumes more intensification than that, then the risk is we don't actually get the development we plan. We don't get our money back, which is a very, very real risk. Whereas there is slightly lower risk with greenfield development, which is one of the reasons it's attractive.
Totally understand that point. Sorry, Chair. Is this an assumption, though, that is set in concrete, the 15% over a 30-year period, or is that something that we should be testing, because it's got a really, really big implication on where we land?
Yeah, well, certainly, I think we do need to have a conversation with council about that and get the council's view on whether we use it as an assumption, because it's a pretty fundamental one. So it's a good point. Thank you.
I guess our starting point is that the council has a future development strategy, and that provides the direction. So we've adopted a future development strategy, and that provides the direction for the growth model work and the rest of the LTP. So whilst we've got that FDS, then that's our strategic direction.
Thank you. Well, I'm a bit conscious on time, but there is clearly some risks in this area, and one that I was going to highlight has sort of been covered, which is the funding cost and putting in all the infrastructure, and then there's a delay in getting the full rates revenue, which we need to think about. But maybe these are good points to bring back in a subsequent paper, because there's clearly been some discussion, and it's real crystal ball stuff. We have a recommendation on page 99, I believe. Sorry, 100, which is on the screen. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Murray. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newbarrow, are you happy to second? Thank you. All those, sorry, any further discussion? All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. The next item on the agenda is an update on the current annual plan.
I can deal with that one.
You'll speak to that one?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kia ora. For the general members who do not know me, my name is Dwayne Fletcher. I'm the Strategic Planning and Enterprise Manager. So Alan's in my team, for example, and his team manage together with finance the annual plan process. Look, I'll largely take the report as read. It's just an update on the annual plan process. From a risk perspective, from a process risk perspective, we are taking an in-principle decision support to council, what's the date, in 2 days' time? And which will help lock in some of our assumptions to form a consultation document, which will get approval at the end of the month. So from a process perspective, we're comfortable that that will de-risk it. From a council perspective, I guess the 9.9% that's mentioned in the report is only achieved for a couple of things. The first is selling off emissions trading scheme credits that are unencumbered, which is a revenue offset of 350, which means, all else being equal, next year the following year we'll have a 350 revenue gap, and the slowing of depreciation, which will make it a fully funding cash funding depreciation, which will mean that we're slightly the gap we were planning in terms of having an operating deficit will be slightly larger than we were planning in the long-term plan. But otherwise, that report is read. Thanks.
Any comments? The risks in this are set out at paragraph 3.6, and I guess I just highlight whether any of those reflect in a can-kicking exercise, kicking the can down the road, and therefore getting a benefit in rates this year that really is resulting in a future cost that's going to be attributed to our children and our grandchildren. So that's, to me, is probably the big risk that sits within this paper, and I'm not sure whether anyone can answer that here or whether, in fact, this is something that councillors need to take away and reflect. And I see you've got a meeting scheduled on the 12th of March. Councillor Newbar.
I think the committee absolutely needs to highlight that risk. I completely agree.
Any further comments? Councillor Woods.
Only one, and that is around the external influence of central government with their rates capping program. I, for one, would prefer our risks and delivery of service ramp towards it rather than hit it as a wall. So I'm looking for a ramping down to that 2 to 4% that the government has indicated. It's not specifically a question as such, it's just my preference is to ramp down to it.
Independent member, have you got?
It was just a summary comment, really, because I'm always about the process. So good update on the process. I guess my question to you as management is that you have enough, or this paper provides enough to start that corridor, and also making sure you're going to get enough back so that what's going to mitigate us from going round and round in circles, because it's going to come down to risk appetite, isn't it? And it's almost, I guess, management's corridor to ultimately top table full council as we can do anything, but we can't do everything, or it's going to be opportunity around opportunity cost, risk appetite. So again, coming back to the process, I just want confirmation, clarity, confidence that we've done everything right to set us up for success, to be as efficient as possible, to make sure you get the answers you need to kind of commence an efficient process.
Yeah, I think that comes back to the earlier through the chair, sorry, the earlier conversation around the long-term plan process, because I mean, the position of management to the council for this annual plan is that is your big opportunity to make real and meaningful and lasting changes. And we're hoping the process that we've established for the long-term plan enables the council to make those.
I just, as a final comment, highlight the requirement for a balanced budget. Now, all of us can make a balanced budget by not doing stuff that we should, but take the concept that this year's rates should pay for this year's benefits provided, and that includes the maintenance and stuff that's required this year, because otherwise we end up back in a cycle which we're seeing at other councils where maintenance has been, shall we say, ignored over decades, and we end up with problems happening in our infrastructure, because this council is actually just a large infrastructure company that happens to produce some other things. So I just caution you in your deliberations about being intellectually honest about the discussions that you're having and the thoughts that are there, because otherwise I think you're courting risk, which is probably outside risk appetite in the long term. Any other final comments? If not, we have a recommendation on page 151, which is on the screen. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you, Councillor Butler. Seconder? Councillor Woods? Any final discussion? If not, all those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. Sorry, the next item on the agenda is our health, safety and wellbeing report. And I'm thinking that we might take a very brief break as we move into the public excluded section, if people need to take a 2-minute break.
So, excluded here.
Right, that's right. So yes, yeah. So 3 more items, and then we'll, at the point we've finished the public section, we will have a very brief stand up and turn around break. Amy and Ian, we're in your hands.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your time. So we've had quite an interesting quarter this quarter. We've had increase in harmful interactions towards our staff across the board, so both internally and externally. We've looked at different ways to tackle that risk through managing work out in the field, but also internal reporting and processes to support the staff who are dealing with that. We've had a number of fires with our resource recovery centres, so lithium batteries are suspected to be behind the fires. We've worked with comms and the waste management providers to look at how we can stop batteries getting disposed incorrectly. But something we've come to realise working with the other councils and waste providers across the country is extremely hard to stop all incorrect disposed batteries. So our response to fires is very important. And our systems are going through a bit of a review at the moment to look at what suppression or what type of tech we can have to detect fires. But at the moment, we're fairly comfortable that this systems have worked. It's also involved talks with police and FENS around managing potential fires and other contractors' trucks on the road who will be using our recovery centre as a drop-down bay. So that was quite a large bit of work. And continuing on the theme with the race recovery centres, in the report we mentioned that WorkSafe was going to conduct an assessment on our on our compaction system there. So they've been didn't take a formal assessment at the time, so it was more of an information gathering process that they went through. Looked at our systems, looked at how the machines are designed and what version of machines we have. So they came away pretty happy from our Richmond Resource Recovery Centre, and we're just looking at the rest of our machines. We got pretty good assurance from our contractor that they've got really good understanding of the risk of their machines that they have, and we also sampled the workers' knowledge of the machines that they use. So we're pretty comfortable with the outcome of that assessment, and we'll look for any learnings that come from WorkSafe for that. Lone working is also been our focus areas this quarter, and we've completed a trial with the Get Home Safe system. So it's an app-based system which can also tie into our RTs. We're really good with our community compliance officers, so we're slowly branching out some of our other environmental science teams. So we've got another 20 people signed up to expand that trial. So we're looking to see how that goes. One element of that, it has a risk assessment form in the app, which lets us get a bit of consistency to basically gain assurance that our workers are following any SOPs that they have, and should something happen or we go and audit, we've actually got an auditable trail of people conducting a risk assessment for the work. So something that came through in the last year was basically we've got a lot of teams with systems, task-specific systems, but we need to come up with a Tasman District Council way of doing risk management overall while still having that focus. So it's been a big part of our work this quarter.
Any questions from members? Deputy Mayor Maori.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions. So firstly, go back to your last statement. So in terms of if I'm a council employee, how do I acknowledge SOPs and safe work practices? Because it sounds like I might do that in a different way. So how do I acknowledge that I've read it and understand it?
Yep, so a big part is through the induction process at the moment, we have a form where the team leader goes through a new worker to read the SOP, and then that'll have acknowledgement there, and then the review process for the SOP. But it's been very team specific, recording or capturing that confirmation of a worker using or understanding the SOP.
And that would be over a period of time?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And then if I jump to the abusive and aggressive and intimidating behaviour, there used to be a dashboard in our mapping that flagged customers that we have unpleasant experience with. I don't know if we still get that. But I was at a few months ago, I was at a workshop with Judge Riley, Tracy Thompson, Rachel Boyack, and somebody from Nelson City Council. We don't share information across agencies, and it was a surprise to me. So you don't share information with Nelson City Council, you don't get information from police, and you certainly don't get anything from Parliamentary Security Services. And I was blown away. How can we do that better? Because the risk of people that have a mindset in terms of will cause particularly compliance grief are held in all these different databases, and you have to find it by accident. So what are we doing to talk to each other?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's something we have been working on. So we have our managed person is now a worker safety alert, which has a flag on GIS maps and plus on the person's name. So we've have a policy and a process around that that's given us assurance. I think that we're managing that info nicely and timely for the people, and we've got a level of risk for a trigger, for want of a better word. But what we've been doing is, community compliance is making their own connections with the police in the areas to do it. But we're really struggling with having an overall repository or a resource that we can go to.
So through the chair, that question's probably for our privacy officer in terms of how can we effectively share threat data across agencies securely and safely that's protected. So because that was the issue with each of those agencies, apart from Parliamentary Services, they seem pretty loose. But in terms of everybody holding their database, but bound by the Privacy Act, but actually in terms of weaving how for the threat level, how can that be shared in a confidential way? I think is probably an opportunity.
We have our General Counsel with us. Are you prepared enough, or do you need to park?
Through the chair, so the Privacy Act does allow sharing of personal information in these circumstances, but there's usually a fairly high bar depending on the situation. So we do regularly share stuff with police where we can. No, not usually.
Some of the other, just on a side note, so some of the other resources, so animal control people have got good relationships with SPCA. So I think if we can look at the other council in the area, it's potentially a good idea to come a bit stronger on that. But there's very area specific where SPCA covers our whole region. So we're looking at those lines, I suppose, but yet again, it's in a very small context.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, because I get you'll be de-escalating courses and all that other stuff, but in terms of a heads up is quite valuable in terms of if there's an ability to share.
Independent member, Annalisa.
I've got a few comments, no surprises. Yeah, the report's definitely getting better and better, so thank you for that. And also, great that you didn't start with let's take this report as read, both the chairman and the speaker, so that was a good result. So a few things from me. Yeah, like when we think about all the regulatory reform that's incoming, not just for local government, but also like the changes to the Health and Safety at Work Act. You know, we've heard that there is going to be a significant focus on critical risks. Most organisations are there. Most organisations are talking about their critical risks. They have a really good understanding of those. But I think where we're heading under the Act is that, you know, our whole reporting will be around our critical risks, right? So I guess I'm getting us ready. Future focus is just think about that when we're kind of evolving and continuously wanting to improve our reporting. Like we've got an understanding of our critical risks. We've given some context and background to them. We've also now linked them to our incidences, which is really good. But think of the other kind of things that you could do potentially going. So every time you have a section in your report, every time you activity happens within the council, like even procurement, you know, like just think, is there a link to critical risks? Is there a link to critical health and safety risks? Because I think that's where we're going to end up. So the actual report, great to see the commentary from the site walk. So that's quite nice to be able to read that in our report. I know when we went on a site visit last year, we provided some feedback. So I think that's a nice addition. I quite like that. I did have a question around, so obviously you've got a KPI for the senior leadership team of 1 a quarter. I think I've encouraged you in the past to make sure you have set a similar target or an appropriate target for governors. So basically this committee and also council members. So what that target might not be for a year, but as PCBU, I expect there will be a target that we all need to meet. And then lastly, obviously, near miss reporting. And I'll talk about this in every hui, but just how can we try and keep getting that better and better? You know, it still looks like it's fairly low. So what kind of incentives can we do just to try and change that culture around the positive, you know, the positive side of reporting near miss reporting? Because the more near miss reporting we have, then hopefully we see the drop in actual incidences, right? So, and that comes back to what good health and safety culture looks like. And I think as a good test might be in, you know, set yourself a kind of wee target. Maybe it's in 12 months' time, but I'd expect you'd be able to go around every single one of these, my fellow committee members, and ask them without looking at their report, what are our 5 critical health and safety risks? And we could tell you. You know, without reading our report, we could actually tell you what those 5 critical risks are. We could tell you what the council's actually doing about it. And even better, you could go to the majority of your team out there and ask them, and they would know what our critical risks were. So yeah, a lot of my korero today is around critical risks. I did have one final comment, and now I'm going to forget it. I think it did come back to. I'll try and remember. I might come back for one more, but that's.
Any other comments? Deputy Mayor Maru.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take one more if I could, just in between. Can I just at some sort get the definitions for the risk matrix? I know it's come out of Dempstra, but what is the assessment for moderate? What is loss of hours, whatever the figure is, just in terms of those completing that loop, so I totally understand how we're ranking these.
Maybe give a clarification in your next report. Is that so? We've got something then in front of us.
Certainly.
I'm sure you can answer it verbally, but it might be good if we have that in front of us to provide a framework.
Yeah.
From Chair, I've got a couple of comments. Glad to see we've got workplace impacts on wellbeing and psychosocial there. We are being asked as a council by our ratepayers, by central government and everyone else to do more with less. And that potentially comes with a cost. So we need to be very aware of the health of our people. And the other one is, lithium batteries. And here, let's find my notes. I guess there's a few risks that I see. People, and our people, if those catch fire and it's in an enclosed space, the risks there to their health. And I'd hope that we've got structures of these batteries once we spot them. There is the risk, of course, before we know they're there, but we've thought about that. The other thing is, how do we mitigate the insurance risk? Because these fires are very hard to put out, and there have been some good papers on these at other councils. So I'd encourage you just perhaps, if you haven't already, see what everyone else is doing. And offline, I might just mention to our COO a set of council papers that are in public offline that you might want to go and have a look at what their solutions were. But they included provision of fireproof bags for them and open covered areas so that they are away from the main buildings to minimise insurance risks and those types of things. It's quite an extensive paper. Any final comments before I put the recommendation, which is on page 151, we've got on the screen? Do I have a mover for that? You're happy to move, Councillor Newbar? Do I have a seconder, Councillor Maru? Sorry, Deputy Mayor. Any last discussion? If not, all those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. The next paper we have is our quarterly risk report, and Amy, you'll probably just about own the chair by the time the meeting's over.
Through the chair. So just a bit of a summary of the risk reporting. So this quarterly risk report provides a summary of provides general comment on the council's risk profile, as well as a summary of some of the risk ratings and specific comment on our strategic risks. So those strategic risks are those risks that cut across council and they affect our long-term, the achievement of our long-term objectives and our direction. So those are the ones that require exec and governance oversight. There's also comment on some of our high-level operational risks, which are those managed by the operational level of council, but they're of a higher enough or outside of the risk appetite defined by council that need to come up to audit and risk. So it doesn't cover all risk at council. You'll have seen the risks come to you identified in council reports. You hear health and safety talk about the risks they manage in Dempstra. A lot of our projects manage health and safety within the context of those projects. And alongside, we talked about the long-term plan and the annual plan, which they have risks around delivering those documents, but also risks that the plans generate or solve. And it's not always the best place for them to come through in this report, although sometimes they will. This report is really focused on those strategic risks and the operational risks. So Another thing to note about the risk reporting is that the way we identify and assess risks is through our risk framework, and that uses qualitative consequence statements and likelihood statements to generate the risk score. So it requires judgment of staff in consultation with me as the risk advisor, and also feeding back information on the risk appetite as well. So that's the quarterly risk report. There's also the operational risk register, which we provide within the confidential section of the report, because there are some information in there which is preferred to see there. Thank you.
Councillor Newbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed that your quarterly risk report downgrades the strategic financial risk to council quite significantly, and it seems to suggest that that risk is a function of affordability, the costs to maintain and renew infrastructure, and I would almost say it should also look at the cost of growing infrastructure networks in the future. Now, to my understanding, we don't understand affordability. We don't really have a measure for affordability in our community. What does it mean? I think it's a really important question that we need to answer, but at this stage, I don't understand what has changed there. I don't think much has changed about the cost to maintain or renew our infrastructure, and we don't really understand the cost of growing our infrastructure network. So on which basis has this downgrade of the risk exposure happened?
Through the chair, I have consulted with a number of the executive leadership team members, and we discussed the rating, the previous rating, which was very high, of the financial risk. And when we looked at it against the risk rating matrix and compared it to what we have in place, so those controls that we have to mitigate the risk, we decided that the previous rating was perhaps too high, and given what we have in place, that actually a medium rating more accurately reflected the current situation.
Through the chair, what are those controls that we have in place here?
So we talked about the budget management we do, the financial management controls that we have in place, how we're prioritising expenditure, and our adherence to the financial strategy.
Just my jumping in, sorry, Chairman. My 5 cents worth is, coming from a risk management background, developing risk management policies, developing risk management frameworks, which was all obviously done probably 2 years ago now, Amy, and it does link through to risk appetite. So, as you know, and I think we've all got a bit of a risk management background, when you're assessing the risk, impact and likelihood, it obviously, gets plotted on a heat map. And there is an owner of that risk. Amy's role is to obviously facilitate that conversation and do pretty much what you're doing, is challenge the thought process behind that. But I think the real important focus and attention needs to be on the quality of the risk information and the controls. So not so much where it's sitting on the heat map, but I kind of encourage the committee to think about, when we understand the risk, do we have a good understanding of the context and that risk profile? And then are we comfortable with where it's sitting? Are we comfortable with the mitigations that are in place? If not, then we obviously need to say to management, well, how can we support you, right? Because we are not comfortable, and it always comes back to risk appetite. If as a committee, and then if you as full council are not comfortable with that risk is sitting, or the controls that are in place, i.e. risk appetite, then as council, what are we going to do about it, right? Because often, if it's an internal risk factor, not external, it'll come down to resource, time and money. So I guess, I encourage that kind of challenge, and that, that's really good korero to push back, and Amy can kind of take that back to the control owner and go, look, there was some korero in the committee that actually they're not really thinking where you've assessed that risk. They actually think it's still as high. But the focus of the korero has to be around controls and what we're actually doing about it. And it may be, given you're a new council, and there's been a lot of change. It may be, it is timely to kind of redo that risk appetite, because your risk appetite will be very different to, well, it could be very different to the previous council, and your assessment and even the strategic risks. So when you do a full risk refresh, which I always kind of encourage to do maybe once every year or once every 2 years, like a full reset, or in local government, obviously with your long-term plan, is that you may come up with 10 completely different new risks, but then they probably won't change that much during your kind of triennium. So that's just a bit of the legacy and history, which perhaps might have been useful if we had more time in a kind of almost mini risk workshop, so you understand the journey that this committee's been on, and I guess Amy's been on. But yeah, timely to think about doing a risk appetite session with a new committee and new, yeah, that makes sense.
Look,
have your role there, didn't I?
That's all good. Look, I mean, I probably shouldn't be doing this. I just look at this with my background as an urban designer, and I look at our infrastructure networks, and I suspect that there is a very high risk in the way we are maintaining those, and the way we're growing those, and the cost of that is hitting us. So I'm just a little bit uncomfortable seeing that, well, downgraded. But then again, I'm not supposed to be the expert here, so.
Yes, these things are a matter of judgment, and we will all bring slightly different judgments to the equation. I guess one of the judgments in the infrastructure area is how much of that infrastructure is not going to be our problem down the track with the WISCO coming in. But I'll leave that one on the table. Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Graham, through the chair. I've just got a very simple question around the risk matrix itself. So normally these are categorised by the severity and the likelihood. So I understand the likelihood aspect, but the severity is normally detailed either as a financial banding or some other reputational risk. And I'm assuming that these are probably spelt out in the business continuity plan for the business, but if not, where do we determine the bandings for the severity?
Through the chair, so we have a risk management framework. I've got a copy of just the risk rating methodology here. So there's the likelihood, and then we call it consequence. And the consequences are defined here. It's qualitative, so it's statements that staff use their judgments to pick the appropriate scoring depending on the type of risk. We're covering financial, reputation, and relationships and reputation, operational, legal and regulatory, people and wellbeing, health and safety, environmental, project performance. So we've got different bands. I'm happy to share a copy of that with you. It's actually, yeah.
Thank you. That would be most helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe to all committee members, just as a refresh. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, my point as a follow-on to there is actually the mitigation of what we're doing about it and how it flows into or is refined in the AP or the LTP. So if it's in the AP this year and it was there, in the LTP, so it's going to happen, that's great, I know that. But it's where there's a high risk and there's no mitigation or plan to address it is what I'm looking for.
Just on a similar vein before our COO responds, is then if we've got mitigations in place for the risk, how do we know those mitigations are effective? Which is the next stage, but I'll hand to our CEO.
Through the chair, I was just going to add to that what you're receiving here is a summary of the risk information. There are more detailed reports that Amy goes through on a regular basis with individual managers who've got accountability for those risks and responsibility for putting into place the mitigations that we record. So that is a piece of work that happens, and it's a piece of work that can come to committee members and or council. The other thing that I'd say in response to Councillor Wood's question, and it touches a little bit on Councillor Neubauer's comments earlier, is that the risk framework which we employ and the degree to which we describe those axes is the consequence of a workshop with the previous council. And as external member Elstop remarked, you will have the opportunity to revisit that because the risk appetite of this council and the way in which that it characterises risk may well be different from a previous council. And that is a workshop which is scheduled as part of our work program where we can have just that conversation, particularly as we go into the long-term plan, because you'll set the risk framework which is going to guide the activities that we have over the course of the next 3 years.
So just one more comment to answer your question through the chair. So where a risk is identified as a mitigation that needs to be undertaken, when I'm speaking with the managers responsible, we talk about how they need to put it within the planning for the annual plan, or they need to take it to council for a decision if that's what's required for that mitigation. However, in some cases, we actually we just have to accept a risk is high, and we just have to live with it until we can do something. Yeah.
If there's no further discussion, do I have a mover for the resolution?
I've just got one final comment. So
sorry.
risk management, you know, can stop me talking. But I want to kind of encourage Amy and the entire leadership team is that what makes me nervous is when management bring me a report and everything's kind of amber, you know, everything's green or amber, because they go, let's not take, so that's not where we want to end up. Let's not take red risk to the board, or let's not take red risk to the committee. So I would rather have it be this way, where management bring us, risk that they do think is high or very high, and allow us to kind of encourage, as opposed to once we start getting reports with no red risk in it, then that's when I kind of start getting nervous. So.
Good points made. We're either not getting the right information, or we've become probably too risk adverse, which could cause us paralysis. We've got to just pick our moments. Do I have a mover for the resolution that's on the screen, page 168? Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Morgan, any final comments? If not, all those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. That wasn't an abstention, was it? That wasn't an abstention? No. Thank you. Just checking. Next report, Amy again, page 177 is the recommendation and the start of the report.
Thank you. So this is the quarterly assurance report. So it contains some of the completed audits and reviews that have happened in what's probably past sort of 6 months at this stage. And it also provides updates on some of the audits that have been completed previously, and we're monitoring the implementation of the recommendations. We have the NZTA technical audit and the OAG flood protection audit, which were particularly the OAG flood protection audit. We had a session with the OAG at the end of last year around when that report came out, so there was further information provided then. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any comments from committee members? Deputy Mayor Murray.
Thank you, through the chair. So just talk me, let's go to the drainage one. So we have drainage that hasn't had an attention, hasn't been rated. So just talk me through the process. So we've got that. What conversations does Jamie have? Who does he have them with? Does he have them with you? What's the process in terms of, sorry, I could have picked anyone, Jamie, but I just want to check. So we've got the report, we've got some findings, we're going to be on a road to continual improvement, I suspect. How does that conversation go?
So in terms of the conversation between Jamie and I, through the chair, you understand good, yeah. Staff identify, particularly if it's an external audit like this, they identify to me audits that are happening, and then they just undertake the audit. If there's any requirement for me to be involved, that's fine, but often, such as the case with this, there wasn't a need for me to be involved. When the audit comes in, it's almost it's an oversight point of view, so I bring it to audit and risk so they can have a look at the activity, and then I monitor to make sure that those recommendations are actually being achieved. So Council and Audit and Risk Committee can be assured that actually we are following through with what we've been suggested that we should do.
I think that's the point. So there's a report. You've got a corrective action open over an audit, you monitor it, you close it when it's closed, you just report back whether it's open or closed. So is there a high level bit there to say these are all the corrective actions that are currently open for council across the board? If I missed that.
No, you're right. It's not a summary report. I've just done it report by report.
Yeah, awesome. I guess that summary would be handy if there's a, depending on how many there are. It might just be so many CAs for transport, CAs for environment and regulatory status of them.
I guess through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the closest you get to at the moment is 3.0, the improvement program, tells us the things that are on track or off track and gives governors the opportunity to dig down into those when we present the report.
Sorry, through the chair, I suspect the drainage part is missing from that part.
Yeah.
So there's a CA, and there's a corrective action sitting somewhere in the system. It's just making sure it gets closed off.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Can I just make a comment? So this is a lot more maturity than we had 3 years ago. And great work, Amy has really driven this, and congratulations. I'll just take you an example. We did a LIM review about 4 years ago, and it showed a significant risk for council about getting information on LIM wrong. You imagine buy a property, you didn't know it was going to flood, then it floods, and we had litigation that can cost us more than probably the house cost. But it's taking a long time for us to set up a team, set up a new process. We've actually got a dedicated team now doing LIMs. Because the cost of that is actually small compared to the cost of litigation and getting it wrong. And because of our hazards, we have to be across those much more. But so just for the reality check is that we take some time because we had to get into the budgets, we had to get approvals, then set up brand new processes. And because it used to be the customer services reps who used to do it, and they just kind of got a whole lot of paper and muddled them together. And no disrespect to them, they were never properly trained. So we have got a trained team now that has significantly reduced our risk. And you probably agree with that, later. I think you didn't sleep at night for a while there, but it did take us about over 2 years or more to be able to implement. So just give you some bit of reality of how slow sometimes things can take, but we certainly kept our eye on it.
Thank you. I was just noting the under 1.1, the NZTA, great emphasis on drainage and environmental maintenance. And I'm aware of another council, not one that I've been on, to be clear, but where they actually cut back on maintenance expenditure to balance the budget and make it work. And as a result, in a rainfall event, they ended up losing whole roads, because the maintenance hadn't been done in those areas. So just highlight the risks of perhaps being penny wise and pound foolish. Not saying that's happening here, but as an example of where we can learn from others in the sector in those areas.
I'll just make another comment just around the IANZ, because I'm particularly proud of this team. I was involved in the last 2 IANZ accreditations here. It's a pretty robust process. They had very few corrective actions, which have cleared pretty quickly. I was at Christchurch City Council. I was brought in to help them regain accreditation. It cost $13 million. So big council, obviously, but it's pretty costly if we don't get these things right.
Thank you. Yes, an ounce of prevention can be worth a ton of cure in these circumstances. Any further?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just thinking aloud here, Amos, as you start this kind of very good, almost shopping list of giving us an update on progress of closing out these items, and these reports are all from different authors, different companies, don't be afraid to ask the organisations to potentially adopt a AMI scale. And when I say that, I mean a Tasman District Council scale, because where that could be quite useful, and I have seen that done in lots of other organisations, is that they may, when they come up with their report, they may say, you know, we've got these findings and they're high, and then they might scale them down to this is like an improvement idea, right? But then when you get to your table, you've just got a whole lot of open items. But I guess as governors, we want to make sure that where possible, because sometimes the hardest ones are the ones that are most complex and you can't close them out in a day. But we want to make sure that we're, and especially when we're a lean organisation, that we're prioritising the, you know, so I imagine a report that's around, I know I won't pick something that's not as important, but a report that's potentially not as contentious or important, that's got items, whereas something else might be. And then you could actually put in this table potentially what the rating was, but thinking that actually it might be good to have a Tasman District Council. And it could be really simple. It could be like a, you know, high, medium, low. And as a governor, I'm probably not going to really care if whether you're closing out the lows, right? I'm going to go, well, if you get time and to do it, but I want to make sure the high and moderate ones are getting closed out. And you could link that to your risk appetite as well.
Thank you. Very good point. And I can think of other councils where there is actually an in-house rating, particularly on things coming out of the external audit, where the external auditors may see it as important, but we've taken a judgment view and said it's not as important to us. But in those circumstances, be prepared to justify why you've taken a different view. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, just on to continue that on, with the Motueka Aerodrome and the Taka Aerodrome audits, which are not being, the recommendations are not being taken forward, page 4. It would be really helpful to know what the actual recommendations are that, you know, that are not being done.
Through the chair. Yes, and at the moment it's with the team to provide some context around what, I know which ones they haven't completed yet, but I'm not sure of the, as Lisa mentioned, the scale of those. Are they high, medium and low? So we're going to work with the team to work out what they are. And it's not that they're not going to be progressed, it's just not that they're not able to be progressed right now with the resourcing available. So a decision needs to be made if those are high risk items and whether or not we need to find resourcing to do them immediately. However, for your comfort, it wasn't a safety audit, it was sort of a management audit, so it's likely not as
yeah, so that would just from a process point of view, having that little bit of extra information in there in the report would be great.
Any other last comments? If not, we've got a recommendation on page 177, which is on screen. Do I have someone to move in that direction? You're happy to move. Thank you. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Woods. Any last discussion? All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. We'll now move on to the motion to move into public excluded before we take a brief break. The motion is set out on pages 241 and 242 of our notes. Do I have someone that's prepared to move in that direction? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Murray. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Woods. Any discussion on those matters and the reasons for going into public excluded? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried.